Hi, welcome back. So last episode was fun. Now today we're going to do something that'll get us maybe half as many hits. We're going to dive back into the substance of the comic books instead of looking at the covers. And the title that we're going to be looking at is More Fun Comics, which we haven't visited since 1936. It's 1937 now. Come on, let's pretend. And we are going to speed through that year to talk about just two features. And they're pretty important features. So we're going to talk about Sandra the Secret Service, which we've talked about a lot before, and one that's very important, Dr. Occult. So let's get started. I'm going to open up my notes here and see what I have to talk about. All right, so Sandra the Secret Service has been the front spot in every issue, even though her feature is still at 3 pages and most of the other adventure strips have been expanded to 4. Sandra has looked different for a while now. W.C. Brigham, who had been drawing Sandra since the beginning, left in April of 1937, and Sandra is now being drawn by Will Eiley, or Ellie, not sure which, and possibly written by him as well. Will, later known as Bill instead, will continue to work for DC Comics into the 1960s. This early in Will's career, he worked in a studio, Funnies Inc. Now, was he now working for Funnies Inc.? I'm not sure, but it's possible that Major Wheeler Nicholson was looking to save time on dealing with individual artists by contracting the studio to take over features. It's also possible that Will was not yet working for Funnies Inc., or he wasn't working for Funnies Inc. when he was working for National Allied. But it is a fact that Will has now taken over drawing Jack Woods from Brigham and has had a strip of his own Johnny Law since May. So, seems to be a pretty big presence now in the comic. Now, in the strip, during the course of this last year, Sandra flew out of Resbia back to Gavonia from a successful intelligence gathering operation. Then she returns to the U.S., or tries to, when two Resbians, one of them named Manos, no, not that Manos, the two of them out for revenge tossed her off her boat. Luckily, because the ship is torpedoed right after that by a submarine, and Sandra and the crewman who tried to save her are the only survivors, both picked up by the submarine. Captain Sneg works for no country but munitions manufacturers who want to drag the U.S. into war by having him torpedo American ships. Sneg's boss is a hooded villain called the Brain. No, not that Brain, who is behind all the warmongering and profiteering off of building weapons in the world. The Brain underestimates Sandra and her friend Michael and tries to put them to work in his kitchen because it's the 1930s and you're a girl. Well, he's also a crewman, but he's with a girl, so he gets to go in the kitchen too. Anyways, they both escape the chef, sort of like the Little Mermaid, and they make it to the wireless room to radio for help. Sandra and Michael escape the island in a boat and are picked up by a U.S. patrol boat brought by her message. The patrol boat torpedoes the Brain's island just as the Brain is supervising an evacuation plan that involves moving lots of dangerous explosives out into the open, and whoops, boom, the Brain is no more. Now, this plot, file it away in your memory because when we get to Superman, one of his earliest adventures is going to seem kind of familiar. This belief that the U.S. should stay neutral and only weapons manufacturers were inciting the nation towards war. Now, to be fair, this was shared by a lot of early comic book creators, but it seems to have also belonged to Major Wheeler Nicholson, and his writers were either instructed to express the same view, felt the same view themselves, or maybe they did it to curry favor with him. Oh, and early in the transatlantic trip, Sandra has time to dye her hair blonde, which it remains for the remainder of the year. Now, finally, back in the U.S., Sandra was accepted back into the Secret Service, even though she had just worked for a foreign government on the side. We learn that Sandra is agent number 37 and that Michael has become a reporter, or that he was a reporter posing as a deckhand on the ship all along. I'm not sure which. Her chief, a man named Ames, puts her on the case of a mad scientist poisoning men who are responsible for his exile from his homeland, but who are coincidentally also currently in the U.S. Sandra drops the ball on this one, and Alex Nestorf kills 4 more people before Ames has to take command of the investigation. But Nussdorf is already dead by the time they find him, and he was killed by someone else who was out for revenge on him. So, yeah, that one got wrapped up real quick. Now, as the year closes, Sandra is reunited with Michael on board a cruise ship heading for Florida for a little vacation time when a rich woman's jewelry on board is stolen. Yeah. Anyways, we're going to go back and talk about Sandra dropping the ball because that seems a little weird. Sandra had been doing a really good job of carrying this title for a while now. So the fact that she just dithers and lets all these killings happen seems a little odd. Now, we know that Major Will Nicholson was writing the early stories, and he did a pretty good job of keeping Sandra pretty much in control of the scenarios. Is Will Eiley or Ellie now writing the scenarios and he feels differently about women in charge? Or has someone else decided that we need to pull back a little bit and not have the woman show so much spunk? Uh, it's hard to say. We're obviously in an era where women don't get to be in a heroic role all that often, so we have to hope for the best. But we know from history that Sandra the Secret Service is not a character that's well known today, so we know that she's not going to hold her own for long. Now, the next title that we're going to talk about is a character that you maybe are familiar with, and that's Dr. Occult. And that is a character that was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And I haven't mentioned them in a while, have I? Now, as the year begins, Dr. Occult has been called in on a medical case, despite not being that kind of doctor, because the patient keeps muttering about life and the price. For some reason, Occult has the man released from the hospital and brought into his home for care by him. That night, a spectral figure appears at the window, takes mental command of the patient, and forces him to try and murder Dr. Occult in his sleep. But the patient resists and chooses death over becoming a killer. Occult hears the man's last words about a ray of life. This is Dr. Occult's second major storyline, his first since defeating Koth, and it's a good one, so it's really odd to me how Dr. Occult is getting shuffled around in the middle of this book and how long it takes, not until the middle of this storyline, until this feature is finally upgraded from 2 pages an issue to 4. It's a serious adventure and a rather adult adventure, and this seems to be the direction Wheeler Nicholson wanted for his comic books. Anyway, the next night, Rose Psychic, who we haven't seen since Dr. Occult's first case, comes over to take Occult out for a night on the town. They are enjoying a nightclub together when they notice someone has been staring at Occult all night from a nearby table. When Occult confronts the man, he finds him dead, and a doctor in the house declares the man has been dead for a month. This trend continues after Occult sees Rose home and is met by Nita Crane, who warns Occult that not just his life but his soul is in danger. And Occult is shocked to see her because he attended her funeral a year earlier. She runs away before Occult can recover and catch her. Sometime later, presumably after getting a court order to open her coffin, Occult confirms that Nita isn't in it. Later that same night, Occult calls Rose on the phone from his home, having decided he has to tell her about what's happening, but then he goes silent. Custer the butler, a character we've never seen before who seems to exist just for this moment, finds Occult at his desk, dead. That's right, Dr. Occult is the first comic book main character to die. Luckily for him, it doesn't last long. At his funeral, Rose utters words she had never spoken out loud before, that she loves Dr. Occult. Now, I have suggested in the past that Rose Psychic and Dr. Occult are such odd names that they are likely not their real names, but their professional psychic investigator names, much like how superheroes will soon have 2 sets of identities. But Rose is consoled at the funeral by some old geezer who does call her Rose in a private, intimate moment, so at least that part of her name is likely real. Remember me saying Siegel was trying to write a more adult story here? I don't just mean more serious themes and more gravitas to the story, although those are important, but even in the verbiage he uses. Note this panel where the moon beams down to illumine a weird sight. Now that's not everyday speech, right? It's literary, almost poetic. I also want to stop here for a pop quiz on panel count. Have you been paying attention to that? because the panel count has been gradually dropping this whole time from 8 panels per page as the strip originally had down to as little as 4 per page by mid-1937. Now, the skeptical might say this is just a lazy reaction to the double page count and making sure Joe Shuster doesn't have to draw more panels than he was already drawing. But let me pause and put in an 8-panel page and a 4-panel page, and then just take a few seconds to examine them. 8-panel, 4-panel. While I've been praising the 8-panel pages in the past for the sheer amount of story Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were able to cram into them, note how fewer panels slows the action down and gives that action more power and gravitas. It creates the impression of a scene that's more dramatic, and most importantly, it looks more like a modern comic book storytelling, which Siegel and Shuster were pioneering all the way back here. Now, only in death does Dr. Occult finally meet the villain, the Lord of Life, a mad scientist who has created a machine that can reanimate the deceased. Or so it seemed. There is a twist ending that feels like a total cop-out to me, if not a convenience that allows the story that had been really exciting to wrap up just over halfway through 1937, and it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't explain how that spectral figure at the window was able to control the man in Dr. Occult's apartment. It doesn't explain how the man that had been staring at him in the restaurant was dead for a whole month. And I can't really explain it. It seems like they had been told that they had to wrap up the storyline, or maybe they were busy on another project. We are just 6 months away from the introduction of Superman at the end of 1937, so they may have been working on something important on the side. But for whatever reason, it's decided this storyline has to get wrapped up way too fast. In total, the Lord of Life story was just 20 pages long, less than a full-length comic book, so it may seem odd that I'm spending so much time talking about it. But taken in these short installments, it's a great way to observe these creators growing as artists into the powerful storytellers that they have to be by the time we get to Superman. Now, after the Lord of Life storyline, our series creators have to take it down a notch. They introduce subtle joke characters. The police captain is now named Gould, like Chester Gould, the Dick Tracy creator. The next killer he goes after is named Henri Duval, the same name as their old musketeer character. In the next story, Occult is consulting for a different police captain, this one named Vin Ellsworth, named after Morfun's two associate editors, Vin Sullivan and Whitney Ellsworth. Unlike Gould, Captain Ellsworth becomes a recurring character. Also, Rose has vanished from the strip again. So what's going on here? Are the boys a little burnt out from this dramatic, serious storytelling that they've been doing and needed a break? Were they asked to lay off the heavy stuff and this was their idea of keeping the strip a little lighter? Did they feel that their relationship with National Allied was rocky since the Comics Magazine fiasco, and naming a character after the associate editors was an idea to butter them up? Were they busy on something else on the side and needed to take Dr. Occult a little less seriously? Again, like so many things that I bring up, I can't say for certain. I'm just throwing these things out here for your consideration, and they are interesting to think about. Well, there's been so much to talk about Sandra and Dr. Occult that I think that's more than enough for this episode, and we're going to wrap up right here. There is so much more to talk about, more fun comics from this year, that we're going to break it up into 2 episodes. So join me next time that we're going to talk about a lot more of the rest. Also, and I don't mean to harp on this every episode, and I don't harp on it every episode, because I hate that, and I know you probably hate that too. But it is important for me that you like this episode and subscribe to my channel. I also have a Patreon account that I will link to below in the comments section, so that if you have not supported this before, this is your chance to do so. Let me know that you are wanting to support this content, and then I'll be able to make a lot more of it. Also, in the comments section, you're going to see a link to the more fun comics issues that I'm talking about, so you can go back and read them and study up for next time, so you'll be well read and able to participate fully. So I'm looking forward to that discussion then, and bye for now.